Inspiration Nation, hello. Lee Kemp here for another podcast. You'll be glad to hear it is the dream team. No Jose this week. Lee and Ryan leading the ship. How are you, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm good. I just wonder when we're going to start our own spin-off at this point.
Yeah, well, we don't, it will dwarf in popularity. And then what do we do? It does become an awkward conversation.
We have to drag Joe back at that point, won't we?
Yeah, that's for you, Jose. We love you, really. Whatever you are doing today. So, for this week, see, Ryan, you did the chat for us on AI last week, which was really good. I really enjoyed that one. Got some good feedback on that as well. I've gone to our friend ChatGPT and asked for a suggestion on a topic today, so I'm going to let it lead us through on what we're talking about. So our opening quote from Henry Mintzberg, who I'll say I'm not sure who that is, and I probably should know who that is. I looked that up while we're talking. Quote is, "We don't think our way to action, we act our way into habits of thinking." We don't think our way to action, we act our way into habits of thinking. And it's the question behind this is, are we actually thinking or are we just reacting faster? So a particular thing I see a lot of stuff about, and I do buy into it, I try and limit what I do with it, but there's a lot of, or not a lot of, I've seen things about your dopamine rush you get from social media.
Yeah.
So that kind of new, and you limit your attention span, which I definitely feel, because there's something the other day and it was a video and it wasn't spoken, it was text. So video came up and it spelled out a story for you on the screen. And I looked at it and it was 3 minutes long. And I was like, there's no way I'm watching this. That's far too long. It's 3 minutes. It's insanity. That's no time whatsoever. But my brain was like, that is too long. Whatever they're saying, it's taking too long to get there. And I'm moving on. I'm going to the next thing. I'm going to the next thing. I'm going to the next thing. So I know that's there, and I know it can. I try and limit. Well, limit's not the right word, but I really try. If I'm watching TV, I won't scroll my phone. I won't get into that habit of doing both, because
Oh,
then you
you're
don't
better than
watch what
me.
you're doing. And I used to
Yeah,
do it
you're
all the
better
time.
than me.
Used to be really bad, and over the last maybe 18 months or so, I've really pushed myself for that concentration bit. Not because you can't look at two things at once. You're not paying attention to both. And there's times when I do look at my phone, but I try not to doom scroll too much if I can, because I do think it does that attention span thing. And I think back to all of this, it changes your thought process. I think I had that there with that 3 minute video, which was just insanity. But one of the things it talks about here in our AI suggestion is the kind of speed versus depth. So are we, and it's an opinion, are we rewarded for fast opinions rather than good ones? And the other question is, when's the last time you changed your mind after thinking something through? And I think, does that come back to the social media thing? Is it like instant, and it's expected everywhere? I mean, if something significant happens in the world, I expect to be able to read about it 5 minutes later. And I grew up in an
Yeah.
era where news was at least a day behind. So it's crazy how much my mind's adapted to that. And does that actually go into, are we expected to react quicker because of all those other things on our lives? So I'll take a breath and I'll stop there and I'll let you throw in your thoughts on that subject.
I think the world has really changed over the last 50 years, as we all know. I think we went through a phase of having short form content pre technology boom. So I'm talking telegrams, I'm talking proper long wave radio that might come on at 1 hour a day to tell you the day's news before it goes off for the next day, all that sort of thing.
I just want to
That was short.
qualify that all these things do predate me, in case you think that's when I grew up.
Sure. And that type of content would have had to have been short form if we're going to apply it with today's lens, based on what the time that they had to share it and the technological means they had of sharing it at the time. So if something happened in Australia back then, it would have taken a day for that news to potentially have reached the UK, for then us to then report it on it and then developed it as news to share with the public at the same time. So it had to be short form, I would have thought, to be able to deliver that message. As time went on, I get the feeling that people wanted more context and more knowledge, and the communication and the content that people consumed, newspapers, early television, radio as it started to blow up, all sorts of that sort of things. It started to become more longer form content, and I think we're coming back round that peak now, where everything short form, snappy, snappy, snappy. I need it now. But rather than where it was 80, 70 years ago, you're now able to access it a lot quicker. I think don't like delays, and I think that's what technology. I think that's probably one of the undertones of why technology is so successful is how efficient it actually is. I don't think people pay like I a bit like you. I've grown up in a world where I didn't have a phone when I was in my I didn't have a phone until I was like 11 or 12, and then it kind of blew up with me as I came into my teenage years. But I think that um yeah, being able to absorb the content, short form, long form, I think attention spans are not weakening, but they're just changing. A bit like how a bit like how movies. How long were the Godfather films? Like two and a half, three
About
hour long
three
films,
months,
right?
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, they were really long. And I'm giving you one example, but I think films in the 70s, 80s, 90s were probably on average a lot longer than what movies are 2010s, 2020s. There or thereabouts. There are some exceptions to that rule, as there always is. I know the Marvel films were always about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. But then there are also a lot of films that are barely 90 minutes. So yeah, I think there's always going to be an audience for both long form and short form, but I think the peak is moving really, really heavy in the short form direction. Um, and everybody wants everything in a bullet pointed, quick 5 second update. Nobody's got the time, nor the effort, nor the willingness to actually really dig into it too much unless they're actually interested in what they're looking for.
And do you even need to? I think is a good thing. It's like you said, things are changing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's for the negative. Also, doesn't mean it's for the
No, of
positive. It
course.
could just be a thing
What
because
it is.
and
Yeah.
even like with AI now, these one of the key things people talk about is, oh, I've got this long document, I throw it in and it summarizes the key points for me, and that's all you really need. And it's interesting what you say is the breadth for the news content change, because I think, like you said, all those the technology evolutions and how it moved and the access to it. And then I think one of the key changes was 24-hour news. So in the 80s, that
Yeah.
became a thing, started in America, came over here with cable news, as it would be called there. We then got Sky News over here or whatever, is where you've just got news, and you've got to pad out the content. You've got to make that work for 24 hours. So maybe actually the reporting got longer, and like you said, now it's got shorter. Social media, the access to it, how it works, what's expected, the immediacy of it, use of, say, more recent, but AI, you can throw in your short things. It's the bullet point thing you said that stuck with me. Is that all? Is that, unless we want to go into the detail, is that all you need actually? And actually, is that freeing you up to do other things because you're not spending 3 hours of the day reading the news that's the world around you, but not your life. So I see the
Yeah, 100%.
improvement angle on it. And then comes the next thing he
You
says on this, and it. Oh, sorry, come.
Sorry, I was just going to say also the commercialism of what that content looks like now is if you're not first, you're last.
Yeah,
So if you can get the story out, or if you can get the headline out, or if you can get those 5 bullet points out a minute quicker than your competitor, you're a minute better. And I think for a lot of things, a lot of especially news outlets, you hear of if there's ever a celebrity death in America, you wait for TMZ to tell you first, right? I feel like that's the thing. TMZ are the people that get these things before anybody else. Um, and it's just who can break the story before anybody else can.
yeah, and
I'm
probably
pretty
layered in like the TMZ thing, a little bit of legitimacy that there's so it's so unregulated now that you want to go to places where you know what you're getting is true.
Yeah, just before you jump on, I watched a bit like how you say you were watching a video on Tik or a short form video somewhere, and it had text and video in the background. I'm a sucker for things like that, but I'm also a sucker for when TikTok pages chop up TV shows and play like minute long segments of a TV show to keep you kind of involved in watching it. And there's one, and I've never actually watched the show, so I'm not going to advocate for it. There's a show called The Newsroom. You ever heard of The Newsroom?
Maybe, definitely never watched it.
Um, from what I can understand, because I have only watched it on TikTok, it's a show about a news broadcasting agency delivering news to America. And one of the most popular scenes I've seen is when they announce Osama bin Laden's death. They announce it 15 minutes before the president does. And that's where that commercialism comes in
Yeah.
before anything else. It's can who gets there first wins. And I think that's changed a lot of how content is because of how the speed it needs to be. Anyway, you were moving on. You were saying,
No, no, it's good. I think that's really good insight. And that's the thing with this is where it's talking about, back to the quote, do we think our way into action or act our way into habits of thinking? And I think we're talking now how almost, culturally, we're changing our approach to things. That short form, digestible bullet point approach is becoming more the expected norm for people rather than the depth and the detail. Next thing it talks about here, and again, it's about decision making, is borrowed thinking. So the comments from the AI is how much of what we say is actually ours, and are we forming opinions or just remixing what we've heard? And again, I think there's such a breadth of opinions out there now. There's a, and again, I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing. Is you the access to a broad range of opinion is far bigger than it was before. Back in my day, if you you generally bought your newspaper that you always bought, and you'd read everything from there, and your views of the
yeah,
world would be very much slanted by that. Again,
yeah,
conscious with social media that as you build up your algorithm, you're slanted in a certain way, but if you're smart with it, you can really get a broad diversity of opinion. And back to this, say is actually ours. It's not, nothing's original, nothing's yours. You're shaped by the environment around you, the opinions you're here. You'll start to then
100%.
decide what you take and don't take, and where your
Yeah,
morals and your opinions and everything lies. But it's all
yeah,
shaped by what you see. And again, the amount of that you get is just, you can't even put a number on it as to how much that is, how many more fold that is than it would have been years ago, where it was a lot more isolated, I guess is the best word for it.
yeah, 100%. What you said there actually really resonated with me really quickly. You've touched on there that your For You page or your algorithm is essentially, if you, for a British phrase, whether you liked red top newspapers or you liked longer form content back
Yeah,
20 years ago, you can set your For You page or your algorithm up to present you a blend of both, or one or end of those, or either end of those scales. And I think that's it. Whilst I understand that you get out of these social media platforms what you put in, it's interesting that is our generation almost version of what our parents went through 20 years ago in terms of how they got their information and
yeah.
news and all that other stuff. I say 20 years, it's probably a bit longer than that, but you know what I mean. Um, but yeah, mental.
No, I mean, 2006, I was very much on the internet, but there was a real
Mm,
generational thing that's different now. You didn't. I'd have been early 20s then, and my parents, oh, the internet, what's that? Don't get me wrong, they all use it now, but at the time, computers were a toy or something you used at work. They weren't a leisure time activity if you were
yes.
grown up, so to speak, which is
Yeah,
different
100%.
now that it's got more into people's use across all generations. But now I'm the quote unquote grown up, and I grew up, I play Xbox type of stuff. That's, it's as generations change. But so I think 20 years ago, it's a fair, the newspapers and buying daily newspaper was a big thing. That would have been in almost every household in 2006, and it's not. I don't know anyone who's ever bought a newspaper. Not ever, but I don't know anyone who's probably bought a newspaper in the last 5 years now, easily.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
I've got here. So AI is a crutch or catalyst is the next thing, and I like it because does using AI tools sharpen thinking or replace it. And I got someone I know sent me a video yesterday on a similar thing where it talks about going to the AI and how much information you can get from it in a quick time. And the next bullet point leads into that. It says, where's the line between support and dependency? And I've seen lots of conversations like this, and I think knowing I am pro AI bias, but I don't think you become dependent on it. You're certainly no differently dependent on it than you would have been for a columnist in a newspaper giving you an opinion 20 years ago. It's just a different type of receiving the information. And I think if you can get it all, you can get it quickly, and you're reading it there instead of a paper or watching the news or whatever it is, it's just a different way of digesting that. But again, it's the pace is a lot quicker, and I do. Yeah, we as a society we're changing how we are things. I do think there is more of a drive towards different opinions or multiple opinions or validated opinions as well, especially as a thing that's come up recently. Whereas I don't think there wasn't a time in the newspaper days where you'd say, well, who are they to have an opinion? If they had a column in a paper, they had a column in the paper.
Better comment on the paper. Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
think there's a lot more, we're starting to move to a lot more of that validation piece around things now.
Yeah,
We know there's
yeah,
loads of
100%.
junk out there as well, but it's not a conversation that was had 20,
But I
30
think
years ago.
But I think that's why people are more looking for validation of who people or what things are now, is because there's so much content around everything that you kind of want to get you from your buffet way of learning that you often talk about. And weirdly enough, I think that's how people use social media, is in a buffet way type of consumption. But um, I th- yeah, I think it's kind of what you put in is what you get out. You have to drive the right outcomes if you want the right stuff to see.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. That I know I've seen some people on TikTok that have got different chat GPT accounts depending on what it is that they're trying to get it to do, because it learns who you are as a person. And some people like to have a personal version, some people like to have a project version, some people like to have different things. And that's absolutely fine, because you're then, even if you're doing it with ChatGPT, there will be people out there that are doing it with their short form or longer form media. Some people will be interested in politics before they have their dinner, and then
Yeah.
after dinner they'll be interested in comedy. I don't know. So some people will have different accounts and different drivers for different topics at different times, and I think being able to segregate it and separate it either through different accounts or through luck, or your For You page being offering you something specific on a specific day, as long as you are getting a variety and you're not getting stuck down the same path or the same conversation, I think you're in the right way. Like, I get sport, I get music, I get politics, I get entertainment, I get real life stuff, I get news, and that's great. But there are some times where all I get is sport, or all I get
Yeah.
is real life, or all I get is music, and you have to force close the app or refresh the page for it to kick back in and start again. There's no If you feel like all you're seeing is the same thing, take a step back and ask yourself, are you feeding that algorithm? Are you sitting and watching all those videos for so long that then makes the algorithm think, ah, that's all they want to see? You get out what you put in.
No, absolutely. And that's the debate point it wants to give us here is one side of this argument is we're losing depth. And the other side is actually we're thinking faster and more collaboratively than ever. And I
Yeah,
actually, and then it ties in with what you're saying is you're responsible for your consumption and push, and sometimes let that go and let it take it new directions, but be responsible with that. Question a bit what you see, but on the arguments front, I'll ask your opinion in a minute, but is one is I say that almost challenges we're losing depth as a negative, and the other the positive we're thinking faster and more collaborative than ever. I think both are happening, and actually you've got a question: is the lack of depth, because I don't think it's depth, it's detail. Can you get as much from two paragraphs as you can get from a whole thing? Can you get enough content from seeing 10 short form videos as you could on one long article? And I don't mean again in terms of the depth of knowledge, because do you need that? Is certain subjects, is it enough just to have an awareness, and then the things you lean to you lean in on? And actually if you're going to form opinions, they're the things, again, be responsible, make sure you understand your subject and what you're talking about. But that's always been there. Again, 20 years ago you'd have people who have really strong opinions, and it's like, oh well, they're just a whatever the newspaper is reader who's just been told their opinion by the newspaper. That's that type of thinking has always been there. I don't think the medium changes that. It certainly didn't create that sort of thinking. It's how you use it and you would adapt with the now. And I see this a lot with new technologies, personal life, in work stuff as well. I work at technology, is problems that aren't new problems get framed around the technology as if it never existed before that existed. And I see the same thing here with the social media. It's a lot of the pitfalls people can fall into aren't new conversations. It's different, but for those that embrace it, the speed of information and the access to so many opinions, it's like it's never been before.
No. And in the same way that people are fighting the commercialism of getting the news out first, getting the most clickable news title is also the most important thing in the world. And that's where clickbait comes in. And um that's where clickbait comes in, and that's where people need to validate the short form content that they view. Like, it's very easy to watch a video that says XYZ things have happened. It's a lot harder to understand or watch a video to understand why XYZ things have happened and what the real reasons are behind it. People use inflammatory language and phrases and sculptures of their wording, so to speak, to be able to tell a narrative that may not be the most honest narrative that the story actually is, so to
Absolutely,
speak.
just adding their bias into it, selling the story they want to say,
100%. Selling the story I
irrespective
want
of
to
the
say, yeah.
facts. Yeah,
There's two
absolutely.
there's there's two ways to sell a news story. One, be the quickest, and if you can't be the quickest, be the most flirtatious with the truth around what it is that's actually happening. That's the way I think. Well, I've never worked in a news space, so I'll never know. But that's the way would imagine their kind of thought. Not well, not all of them, but some of them would be is if you can't be first, be best.
Yeah, what's that attention grabbing headline that makes people come to you?
Yeah,
Absolutely. And it's saying here, so I say a big part of this, and I think we touched on it, is just repeating opinions doesn't mean you're right, and there's a bit of talk about changing opinion. And it goes on to say the last thing is creating space to think. So, do we actually give ourselves time to process anything with the speed at which we go through things? And the other
yeah.
question is, what does good thinking even look like in a busy life? On that second point for an opinion, before I get your view on them, I think it's about being intentional. All of this is be intentional. And we've talked through it through here. Be conscious of what you're subjecting yourself to in your timeline, and you're not. Lean towards things. Consciously take in different views and form an opinion. Again, that can be done quick. That can be done bullet point. It can be done more in depth. But whatever, I think good thinking is intentional thinking. It is don't just react. Take that second, and sometimes all it is to think about stuff, digest it, rationalize around the side about it, and don't be afraid actually to go in a different direction, change your views as you get exposed to different things. But I think to Nick, and this is what I know Joe would be saying if he's here, is just be intentional about it is what's key.
One of the smartest things you can do is change your opinion with informed decisions to help you to do it.
Absolutely.
There is absolutely no honor in making an off the cuff decision and sticking by that as if that's the only way the truth could ever be. Even if you've learned that perhaps you were wrong and stick by it, that's worse than having the honor of a person that has learned to change their opinion based on the right things that form them. Um, what were the last two questions? Sorry,
So
you
it's
did
no,
say
it's creating space to think. So do we actually give ourselves time to process anything as a challenge to all ourselves?
sure.
And what does good thinking look like in a busy life?
I think I think where people need to watch three or four different short form videos to really understand something, I think that's because you're taking the view of three or four different people that have different perspectives and hopefully sometimes different opinions to allow you to hear informed arguments on both sides of a subject and then understand where you sit in that. I think sometimes if I read a news article and you read a news article, Lee, and we both decided to make a TikTok about it, we would inevitably probably have slightly different views on that. But how we project that and the words we use to promote our views on what we've read are what people latch onto and buy into. And I think a lot of news outlets and a lot of short form media content creators that try and share news or anything like that, there is always if you've ever studied emotional intelligence, there's always an unconscious bias in one way or another. And where it's unconscious, it isn't deliberate, but you need to be able to understand that the bias sometimes will exist and that you need to be able to understand that to get the truth out of what it is that you're trying to read and understand. And then you'll apply your own unconscious bias to it because we all do the same thing anyway. And that's where these things get warped, perhaps slightly twisted, and then people can craft their own agendas out of things that they want to see.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's good thinking. And again, it's just back to that, yeah, being aware of that thought process. I mean, ultimately here, this is a bit of a challenging thing. You know, are we thinking more shallow? Is that a bad thing? Are we just reacting, regurgitating? They're all the questions here. We could probably do with a different, because I think we're both in a place that we don't think it's a bad thing. We don't think there's new problems. But it's the same of being there and being intentional. We
It's
probably
the
could
devil
do
in a
it.
different dress. It's the devil in a
Absolutely, I
different
like
dress.
that phrase. I like that. In fact, that should be our subject for this week. The subject
Sure.
title, I think. But it'd be good as well if you're out there, if you're listening, if you've got differing views on this, if you've got the same view, if you've got questions, we'd love to hear from you. We haven't got TikTok live going because Jose's not here, but leave questions in the comments and we will revisit those. Need to just wrap us up before I run out of time. ChatGPT again, embracing AI has really helped us. A great subject there. Really good thoughts there. Ryan, we'll see a bit what Jose thinks next week as well, because no doubt he will listen to this back. Obviously, far better than any podcast that he's been in, but he's just got to deal with that. And then you'll give us a comment next week, Jose.
I mean this with all the love in the world, but Jose is a man that would have experienced both pre-technology life more as well as pre-technology life more than the pair of us. So I know we take the Michael out of him around his age, but I would actually like to see what
He's
his
got a good
perspective is on
viewpoint,
this.
absolutely. Let's
Yeah.
revisit this conversation next week. So I would appreciate it. So as you said, Joe has experienced both pre and post civilized life, so he completely understands that. But if you like, not just leaving the comments, but if you like what we're doing, subscribe, leave a review, tell friends and family. Search Jose Noya on Inspiration Nation. And follow him both on YouTube and TikTok. Some absolutely fantastic content. He's building up a fantastic community, all resonated by his positive mindset. So if you want some of that in your life, go on, follow. You can see his daily updates and you can get involved with us live on the podcast when he decides he wants to show up. I think all that's left for me to do then is count us down. We've already got a subject for next week, so I feel like we're over prepared on this, which
We're
is
flying.
great. And
We're
I'll
flying.
say 3, 2, 1, Inspiration Nation.
Inspiration Nation.
Catch you
We'll
guys
catch
later.
you guys later.
Oh, wait, hold on. Later.